I'm Reverend Portia Cavett, the pastor of Clare Memorial United Methodist Church, and we're happy to have with us this morning Midlands Mentoring Partnership, Family Housing Advisory, North Star, Nebraska Appleseed, Open Door Mission, Urban League, Voices for Children in Nebraska, and Omaha Together One Community, known as OTOC, as well as Lutheran Family Services. And so we ask that you would indeed check with them.
There'll be an opportunity for your table to have a conversation around a couple of questions, as well as there'll be Q&A times a couple of times this morning. All of our time together is bringing forth the kingdom. So I invite us to listen to these words from Isaiah as kind of a centering prayer about what is this kingdom? What does it look like? So if you want to pray with your eyes open or closed, let us hear from the 65th chapter of Isaiah. I am creating new heavens and a new earth. Everything in the past will be forgotten. Celebrate and be glad forever. I am creating a Jerusalem full of happy people. I will celebrate with Jerusalem and all its people. There will be no more crying or sorrow in the city. No child will die in infancy. Everyone will live to a ripe old age. Anyone 100 years old will be considered young, and to die younger than that will be considered a curse. My people will live in the houses they build. They will enjoy grapes from their own vineyards. No one will take away their homes or vineyards. My chosen people will live to be as old as trees, and they will enjoy what they have earned. Their work won't be wasted, and their children won't die of dreaded diseases. I will bless their children and their grandchildren. I will answer their prayers before they finish praying. This is God's beautiful vision of the beloved community. And we are all signs of that community this morning. We're here to bring forth the kingdom of God.
Thank you, Carol, for the word of God that challenges us to bring about that kingdom. At this time, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our first voice that will speak to us around this issue. I'm happy to welcome and to introduce Dr. Jonathan Benjamin Alvarado. He is the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs at UNO, which he has been a part of that community for 14 years as a professor in political science. The founding assistant director of the Office of Latino Latin American Studies, and as the director of Intelligence Community Scholars Program. Won't you at this time please welcome Dr. Benjamin Alvarado.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thank you very much, Portia and Carol, for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to be here and to speak with you. Lest I get too full of myself, I have to share a story with you about something that happened to me a long, long time ago that has kept me very, very humble. As I had finished my doctoral studies and had become a newly minted PhD, I was at the University of Georgia, enjoying the life of a young academic with a wife and a young child, and we took our daughter everywhere with us back then. And we were invited to a very fancy dinner at the university one time, and Isabel is about 4 years old. And you have to understand that Isabel's grandfather was a plastic and reconstructive surgeon, and her aunt was a physician. And so she knew full well what doctors do. And so she had trouble understanding, though, what I as a doctor did. And so I tried to explain to Isabel that my role as a professor was and how it could help people. And so, but understanding and bracketing that against the experience of her grandfather and her aunt, we went to this dinner, And I think Dan Rather was the guest or something, and she got to go up and meet Dan Rather. And he says, well, what do you do, honey? She goes, well, I'm a little girl, you know. And then she goes, and what does your daddy do? He says, well, he's a doctor, but he doesn't help anybody. Like I said, remember that Art Linkletter, out of the mouths of babes, you know. So it's always kept me very humble. But I want to turn to something much more serious, and I'm so happy to have this opportunity to share something that I did in Lincoln a while back, and I've kind of revised it a little bit for this audience this morning. But what am I talking about? What is the bottom line up front? Because I don't want to just build up to something. I want to let you know from the very outset what I'm going to talk about. And I'm going to talk about what it means to be poor, what it means to be poor in Omaha, Nebraska in the year 2015, and the power of words and the power of language, how it shapes our orientation to our understanding in the manner in which we treat the poor. So the questions I wanted to ask at the beginning of this is, what are the implications of the labeling of the poor, and how does it shade public attitudes on poverty and its alleviation? You have to understand that being poor is a social construction. It's an identity that is foisted upon people. People are not poor because of their socioeconomic status, just as they are not illegal because of their status of residency. This is very, very sad because we used to fight a war on poverty. Now we fight a war on the poor. It's a very pernicious and wicked way of our life today that renders us unidimensional. We want to reduce who everybody else is by a single identifier. Thus, we create an environment in our society in which people can be easily shunned to the side, cast off as somehow less than and ultimately undesirable. So how do we address this? In what ways can we, as good people, fight a war back against this? There's three things that I'm going to talk about throughout the talk. Empathy, intent, and action are the way forward to address this. So to bring this into sharp focus, I want to share a little story with you. I'm a big movie buff. I love movies. I go to movies all the time. I'm on the board at Film Streams. Channel 55 is my channel. I love watching movies. I grew up watching movies as a kid, and that's where I get lost. That's where I get my ideas. And one of my favorite movies of all time is A Night of the Iguana, a Tennessee Williams play that eventually was made into a movie in the early 1960s. And the reason I like it now is because it really helps to define how we utilize and the power of identity. And long story short, it's a movie about a woman who runs a hotel near Mazatlan, Mexico in the 1940s, early 1950s. It is Ava Gardner who plays the role of Maxine, the hotel owner. And she discovers that one of her guests, a woman named Hannah Jelks, played by Deborah Carr, has arrived at her hotel. And she's seeking lodging with her old senile grandfather in tow. What Maxine doesn't know is that they're penniless. And they have no prospects of any money to come. And so finally she finds out that this is a ruse that Maxine and her grandfather have been doing across Mexico. And she confronts him and says, I know that you don't have any money. And so Deborah Carr responds and saying, well, I have jewelry. You know, I can use this as collateral until my money comes, as if it has the possibility of whisking her away from the situation that she finds her and her grandfather in. And let me just read a little bit of the scene, because I think it's important to kind of illustrate the point that I want to make here. So Maxine's character goes, yeah, honey, but I'm not operating a hawk shop here. I'm trying to run a hotel. Hannah responds, I know, but couldn't you have just accepted a security for a few days here? Maxine says, you're completely broke, aren't you? She goes, yes, we are, completely. To which Maxine responds, you say that like you're proud of it. Hannah says, no, I'm not proud of it. I'm not ashamed of it either. It just happens to us, which has never happened to us before in all of our travels. Now, in a very short dialogue, Tennessee Williams unveils for us a crisis that has the possibility of befalling every human who is confronted with the situation of being impoverished economically. You can ascertain that Hannah and her nana have fallen on hard times, and that they have been compelled to pull the scam that is now being revealed. It's an act that the situation dictates. It is clear, yes, that they are poor, but it does not make them poor people. Their identity here is socially constructed. It is situational and subject to change. It is also clear that Hannah is unwilling to cede her dignity and her sense of self. She, like many people in that situation, will not easily let go of who she is and what she stands for. She is representative of the human spirit that was so pronounced in this country in the period after the Great Depression. This is a generation whose worldview was colored by a situation of life in a time where severe economic distress. And one could certainly make an argument that they collectively worked to extract the nation from the abyss and to create a post-war economic juggernaut where the United States would become what it is today. Everything about that effort was indeed exceptional. But it also highlights the selective memory of many who neglect that much of the impetus for growth was part of an extensive social welfare engineering in the New Deal and a coincidence of a wartime economy that spurred growth. If we let the story be told, much of that is missing, and we only hear the fight against fascism and the inherent greatness of America. And I mean no disrespect, but it would be impossible for the United States to pull up itself from its bootstraps had Uncle Sam not been so generous in providing the boots. It is vitally important that we tell these stories, that when we are building an American exceptionalism that neither ignores our history or casts it as irredeemable. This is to say is that poverty happens, but for many, we only care when it happens to us. It's a lot like surgery. It's only minor when it's on someone else. An Atlantic magazine analysis of something that happened in the recent past, Ferguson, Justice Department's investigation of the Ferguson Police Department, sheds even more light on this type of a situation. And it reveals how ingrained in persistence this impulse within human nature is to label people as something other. If we call them poor, then we can more easily dismiss who they are. Ferguson is a city of 47% black. 31% of those families live in what we call poverty, earning less than $24,000 annually. The focus on revenue is almost the entire focus on a black population in that city as revenue in the eyes of the police department. Black people in Ferguson were twice as likely to be searched during a police stop, twice as likely to receive a citation when stopped, twice as likely to be arrested during the stop, and yet they're only 26% less likely to be found with contraband. Black people are more likely to see a single incident turn into multiple citations in the city of Ferguson, Missouri. The disparity in outcomes remained even after the Department of Justice conducted a regression analysis used to control for non-race-based variables. One should understand that the Justice Department here did not simply find indirect evidence of unintentionally racist practices which harm black people. Instead, what they found was a discriminatory intent, which is to say a willful racism aimed to generate cash. Justice in Ferguson is not a matter of racism without racists, but racism with racists who are so secure, so proud, so brazen that they use their government to flaunt it. There were emails that included jokes depicting President Obama as a chimp, mocking how black people talk. I'd be so glad that this be my last child support payment, depicting blacks as criminals, welfare recipients, unemployed, lazy, and having no frigging clue who their daddies is. This humor, given the imprimatur of government email and communication, resulted in neither reprimand, nor protest, nor even a polite request to refrain from reoffending. Instead, according to the report, the emails were usually forwarded along the line to others so they could too see the humor in this as well. That many of the perpetrators of these incidents may have been forced to resign, exiled, or walked away, but there's nary a whimper of evidence that there was any kind of thing to correct their collective callousness. One should not resist the urge to clutch the pearls and carp about mean people of Ferguson. Bigoted jokes are never really jokes at all, so much as a tool in which one sanctifies the diminution of one's character, and in this case, plunder. If the black people of Ferguson are 47% and deemed a class of takers, of immoral reprobates, driving up crime while driving down the quality of life, then why should they not be the sources of revenue? In this way, the joke transfigures raw pillage into legal taxation. The joke is, in fact, an entire worldview that reveals that the agents of plunder, the police in this particular instance, are not, in fact, plundering anyone at all. They're just making sure that the reprobates, the degenerates, the sinners, and the ne'er-do-wells, the good-for-nothings, pay their fair share. You see, we've eliminated who these individuals are as humans, rendered them unidimensional. That way, we can easily and summarily dismiss them as anything of importance to us in society and then use them for whatever we want to. Targeting, subjecting, and extracting money from those least able to pay, literally blaming the powerless, the impoverished, and blacks for being powerless, impoverished, and black. Serial dehumanization extended to its most heinous and perverted conclusion. Ironically, the Department of Justice report revealed that there were on average more than one outstanding warrant for arrest per citizen residing in the city at the end of 2014. Yet we shouldn't be surprised. The social philosopher Herbert Marcuse argued that the development of modern society, its industrial and economic structure, its technological rationality, totally undermines and erases the basis of the individual. Under his view, our lives demand increasing accommodation to those elements, submission to domination and administration that serves those ends. Little by little, and with wicked efficiency, humans and their identities are eroded and diminished, and over time we do lose our individuality, our freedom, and our ability to dissent in any meaningful way, and to have any control over our own destinies. Even the private self is whittled away by a society that shapes aspirations, hopes, fears, and values, and even manipulates vital needs. This is the self under siege. The impact on the individual is profound, even if we are people of means. This trend toward assimilation in modern society is even more devastating for those on the wrong side of the economic ledger, because of the manner in which it segments and stratifies everything, and any entry into the world of work. In the 21st century, blue-collar work has declined relative to the rise of white-collar and service industry work. We are a country where a mere 40 years ago, nearly one-third of the jobs were in manufacturing, blue-collar jobs, union jobs for skilled labor with benefits and opportunities for collective social advancement, for the workers and their families. Today, the number of service jobs dominates the workforce, but this is precarious employment, owing to scant benefits available and even fewer opportunities offered to workers trying to make their way in the world. This is a world of merry-go-round employment, individuals with diminished opportunities and few prospects. If one finds themselves at the lower end of the economic scale, they are all but invisible to society. The perniciousness of this modern reality is one that has rendered all of us, for the most of the part, unidimensional. And I mean, even as we struggle for recognition. These are flat characterizations of who we are, and as a consequence, all that much easier to look past. If I'm only seen as a Latino, if she's only seen as a black woman, if you're only seen as a poor person, so much easier to dismiss who you are and really what you are all about. We need to be careful, because as we marginalize, forget, and in some instances seek to destroy, this is what occurs. In this way, we should be careful of these labels and these identifiers and these variables that we apply to those people. This is where Marcuse was so prescient and insightful in his thought and evaluation of the modern condition. It really isn't so difficult if we apply technological rationality, how to best direct and manage the interaction of modern industrial society and humanity to produce the most efficient outcome, even if it requires diminishing our humanity to achieve those ends, reducing it to the absurd, reducing the relationship of humanity and society to where humans are little more than artifacts. Marcuse understood this impulse well for the manner in which it has been abused and perverted in Germany under the Nazi regime, which he had escaped some 20 years before writing this stuff. Prior to writing One-Dimensional Man, this serves us, I think, as a cautionary lesson for us, because similarly, the impulse here today is no less powerful and daunting. The demand for outcomes-based measures of success, the call for more quantitative evidence, the bottom line, the fact that humans in the education enterprise are reduced to nothing more sometimes as a cost center. And I could go on. But the power of the impulse manifests itself in the language that our collective organizational cultures force us to adopt. Euphemistic language on how to relate to people we come into contact. Think about this. What comes to your mind when I say free and reduced lunch? What comes to your mind when I say admitted by review? What comes to mind when someone says behavioral review team? There's certainly legitimate means of how to identify the specific needs of individuals, but it's a very short distance then when we use this language to shunt aside, to marginalize, and to limit the humanity of those we come into contact with. According to the census, and we're not entitled to our own facts, folks, contrary to what some people would have you believe, the median household income in the United States in 2013 was about $53,000. It's the latest data we have available. While poverty rates for blacks and Hispanics are nearly 3 times higher by absolute numbers, the predominant face of poor in the United States is white. We have almost 19 million whites who fall below $23,000 for a family of 4, accounting for more than 41% of the nation's destitute. Nearly double the number of poor blacks. In all, there are almost 50 million Americans who fall below the poverty line. 15% of all Americans today are living in what I would call abject poverty. And that's a whitening of the poverty and of the poor in this country that we have to think about. In some places, it does cause more racial tension and more collective class action. According to the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, there is no state in the United States today where a 40-hour work week at a minimum wage is enough to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. While poverty rates for blacks and Hispanics are nearly 3 times higher by absolute numbers, as I said, the dominant face is still white. And to think many people are dismissive of this mass of humanity and barely think twice as they derisively refer to them as trailer trash or white trash, making it all the easier to dismiss, disregard, and throw away the reality of their lives, meaning their hopes, their dreams, and their aspirations. Political science Corey Rubin, in a recent essay in Salon magazine, reflected, in 1959, in the journal Dissent, an article was published by the German Jewish emigre philosopher Hannah Arendt. That article was a criticism of desegregation and the defense of states' rights. Reflections on Little Rock, it was titled, and in Rubin's words, it was controversial, offensive, and wrong-headed in almost every way. But one point, beyond the immediate question of integration, about which she was wrong, she did get something right. Why, she wondered out loud, do we burden children, black and white, with working out of the problem which adults for generations have confessed themselves unable to solve? It's an age-old dream, she acknowledged in a reply to her critics, that one can change the world by educating the children in the spirit of the future. But doesn't that dream just shift the burden of responsibility from the shoulders of the adults to those of the children? And one has to question then, really, what is the price of education if this is all we're hoping to do, shift responsibility? In the United States, we often try to solve political and economic questions through our schools rather than in society. Instead of confronting social inequality with mass political action and state distribution, we prefer to educate children to wealth. Students should learn firsthand that race and race privilege are indeed constructed, in a term often bandied about but not always understood, not merely by words and symbols, but by laws, taxes, wealth, and institutions. We treat poverty in an eerily similar fashion. In confronting the defenders of these privileges, which might include parents, teachers, principals, and even themselves, students would see in a concrete way just how invested people can be in their privilege. And who knows, they might even win. So to simply default to the adage, each one can teach one, each one can reach one, this really falls short of the task that we have at hand. If we're truly to address the depth and devastation of poverty in our society today, it is we who must manifest the desire and the promotion of change we hope to see. Leaving it to oversimplified lessons in values and behaviors for our children, while laudable, and certainly a central part of providing them with sound and holistic education, it does nothing to address the power of marketing from Madison Avenue for the latest gadget from Silicon Valley, and the inculcation of consumerist instincts that can never be satisfied and always leaves us wanting in the face of a quality of life that is slipping through our fingers. This isn't just hyperbole. A recent survey conducted by Community Action of Nebraska reports that 50% of Nebraskans responded that the cost of food exceeds available funds on a monthly basis for families, many who are well above the established poverty rates. So, as I asked at the very beginning, what are the implications of labeling of the poor? And how does this shade our attitude on poverty and its alleviation? Being poor is a social construction. It's an identity created by people. People are not poor because of their situation, just as they're not illegal because of their status. This is a pernicious and wicked way in which our lives are constructed that render people flat, unidimensional, and that's very much more easily to be disposed of. I want to share with you a couple of quotations before I close that I think refer to us as reminders of the task in hand and a collective responsibility that we should hold as we go about our work. The first one is from my childhood hero, Robert Francis Kennedy, as he calls us to action. He says, let us dedicate ourselves to what the Greeks wrote so many years ago, to tame the savageness of man and to make gentle the life of this world. The second is from Martin Luther King. He says, if we do not act, we shall surely be dragged down the long, dark, and shameful corridors of time reserved for those who possess power, without compassion, might without morality, and strength without sight. So how do we confront these challenges? And I think we're called to, if we're all good Christians and people of God, that to those who are given much, much is expected. You know, finding the face of God in everyone who we meet. Doing what Jesus taught. To those who are given much, much is expected. And I've continued to tell my daughter this since she was born. And I tell it indirectly to my students. I can't preach it at the school. But as Christians, we share the good news. And so often, it's just simple caring and kindness that creates the kernel of hope for those of individuals who find themselves in these situations. Like Hannah Juck's character in the film, not willing to give up her dignity to who she was as a human, in the face of the despair that she faced. Further, I think it behooves us to become advocates. And we have many of the advocates here in the room. Thank you so much for the work that you do in our community. If you listen to it, it's the root of the word advocate is Latin ad voce, to give voice. All of these organizations give voice to the people who find themselves in poverty. Remember, I don't want to, just as I don't want to call anybody illegal, I don't want to call anybody poor. Very powerful that we have to remind ourselves of the language that we use to give voice to the human condition. And I'm going to close with lyrics from one of my favorite songs when I was a younger man. My brother's a reggae music artist, and so I listened to reggae in our house since we were little kids and saw Bob Marley when we were all teenagers in the whole nine yard. But one of my favorite groups in the 1980s was a group called Black Uhuru, Black Freedom. It's a Swahili word for freedom. And they had a song called Solidarity. Ironically, it was not written by one of them. It was written by one of Bruce Springsteen's musicians, Miami, Steve Van Zandt, who was in The Sopranos. And it's a long story. But the song is called Solidarity. And the lyrics go something like this. Everybody wants the same thing, don't they? Everybody wants a happy end. Everybody wants to see a game on Saturday. Everybody wants to be somebody's friend. It says, look at me, I am not the enemy. We stand on solid ground. We don't need to fight each other. What we need is solidarity. So as we begin to think of how we leave this room and go out into our communities, we need to understand that we have to support each other. We have to act in solidarity to begin to address the totality and the perniciousness of what poverty involves. We all know that it's merely time and circumstance that separates us from so many people who have had this befall them. It can happen to any one of us at any time, a catastrophic accident, some life-altering event that takes us from the comfort of where we are today and puts us in a situation that's going to severely test who we are and test our mettle. It doesn't make us a poor person. It just makes us people who happen to find themselves in that condition. Thank you.
You used a phrase I've never heard. Will you say a bit more about merry-go-round employment?
Yeah, a lot of young people especially are very much in tune with this. And this is employment usually with service sector types of jobs, retail, fast food industry types of work that is really provides no hope for advancement. Essentially, they are dead-end jobs. What it is that, to satisfy the bottom line, many of these jobs, you will not be offered any more than 35 hours a week maximum. In that way, you don't have to pay any benefits or health care to those individuals. And then they constrain you by imposing hours on you that may be unrealistic. We've heard of many companies today that insist on somebody having 2 shifts in the same day. 4 hours in the morning, 4 hours in the afternoon. You're responsible to get back and forth to work, or 3 hours in the afternoon, so you have to work a full 8-hour day. But the fact of the matter is, this is a vicious merry-go-round of which young people, once they get on, it's very difficult to get off. One of the reasons why we have to look at them differently than we have in the past is that when I went to school, back in the late 70s and early 80s, you could work in the summer, 40 hours a week, at a minimum wage job, and be able to earn enough money to pay your tuition for an entire year at a state university. When I went to UCLA, the tuition per quarter was $292 a quarter. So I paid 3 quarters. I had to save $900 so I could pay for my tuition. And then I could work 10 to 15 hours a week during the school year and have enough money to go out and get pizza, a few beers on the weekend, so on and so forth. Absolutely impossible today. The state contribution to higher education continues to diminish. We're lucky in the state of Nebraska. I have to tell you, the one thing I could say really good about our former governor and our former president of the NU system is that they did establish a very firm baseline for providing funding for higher education. But if you look at places like Kansas, you look at Wisconsin, you look at Louisiana, they're completely gutting and undermining the capacity of the state to provide a sound higher education platform, not only for people of the state, but for the economy and society as a whole. So that merry-go-round jobs is a very, very bad thing because we put our children to go out and get a job for the summer. That's going to save your money. Well, guess what? They got a cell phone. They didn't have cell phones before. Half the time, parents make the kids pay for it. If you want to have the newest and latest and greatest gadget, that's going to cost you, and it's not cheap. So we have to take all those things into consideration, and it's a vicious cycle for young people.
We're at our table, and you talked about homelessness in college students. Would you share some of that?
We have recently discovered that we have a small but growing population of young people, for one reason or another, find themselves homeless. It's a little bit easier to do it in college because you could take a shower at the gym every day. There's places to hang out in the library from, I would imagine, 7 in the morning till about 10 or midnight at night. But the fact is that we've noticed that there is a growing population. We can't approach them and say, hey, we have a sneaking suspicion that, you may not have any place to live. But we are trying to improve our skill at being able to provide these young people with some service. UNO, we don't have nearly enough housing for the students that want to live on campus, let alone those who don't have any place to live at all. And so we're kind of between a rock and a hard place. But it's a growing population, and it's rather unfortunate. What we're also seeing is largely due because of the growing cost of a higher education, which is, in many cases, especially if you're a first-generation student, all but impossible to navigate unless you have some assistance.
But what I want to address in Dr. Benjamin's speech is like the fundamental root cause of poverty, talking about the war on the poor and issues with like education not being funded and capitalism being like a root cause of people not being able to get jobs and things like that. And so I see a conflict between helping people who need help now and dealing with these root causes. So how do we balance that as individuals and as a community?
Well, I did say that part of what we have to do is we have to be in constant communication with our elected officials. It's incumbent upon us as citizens to actively engage them and to provide them with education if they're not fully up to speed. I mean, they're going to sit and may deny that there are certain things, but like I said, we're not entitled to our own facts. And the facts speak very, very loudly to me today that we don't spend nearly enough time addressing the entirety of the issues related to poverty. Part of it is solved by policy. Part of it is a reality of the world in which we live. That's why, the services that Open Door Mission provide those people cannot live without them. But we also cannot live without there having to be some change in policy. And it's really unfortunate that it's literally a dilemma. There's the two lemmas, the two problems that we have. One of them, we have a society that is completely unforgiving. Let's just put it that way, And if you happen to fall on the wrong side of the ledger, you're in trouble. Serious trouble. And yet, on the other hand, we have to be adamant about ensuring that our elected officials know and fully understand what it is that we deal with in our communities. And nobody better to tell that story than the people that actually live in those communities.
Just to kind of hang on your point about the work ethic for the people that have the merry-go-round jobs, another big problem is the fact that a lot of these employers will demand these people be on call and come at beckoning call. And that's another huge problem. Because in other words, even though they're on an hourly job, they don't have their own lives.
See, but it goes back to what I said. I was talking about this really pernicious technological rationality that says, hey, to best impact my bottom line, I need to have an on-call, ready at any moment workforce. And I don't care what they look like. I don't care where they come from. I don't care how that impacts their lives. I don't care the level of anxiety and stress that that's going to place upon them. Because the only thing that matters is my bottom line.
Yeah. And of course, the thing is, you go into like a nurse or something like that is on call. He or she gets paid for that on-call time.